Number 1. Through the park. One of the most frightening nights of my life happened when I was a teenager. I was spending the day over at a friend's house on the weekend. We got pretty caught up in what we were doing, as we always did, and I was there for pretty much the whole day, and a really long portion of the night. It was pretty late when I finally decided to go home. My friend had parents that stayed up pretty late at night, but this time they'd already gone to bed. He offered to wake his dad up to give me a ride home, but I didn't want him to do that. It was too dark and late, and it was going to be a long walk, but I had no problem doing it by myself. He lived on one side of town, in a really built-up subdivision. I was in an older neighborhood in which all the houses did not look alike, but although it was a small town, it was quite a walk for me to make. Walking outside, I noticed that it was very windy outside. It was early in the fall. School had recently just started, I remember that. Looking up at the sky, I noticed that the sky was not overcast, but the clouds were moving very fast. They would cover up the moon pretty quickly. I wasn't the type of guy who got scared by walking anywhere in the dark. I did that sort of thing all the time, really. And I had, in fact, walked from my buddy's house to my house many times late at night. But for some reason, this night, I began feeling very uncomfortable for some reason. It was like in an old cartoon, where the character breaks the fourth wall and asks you if you've ever gotten that feeling like you were being watched. And yeah, that's exactly what I thought of at the time, a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And I was really getting the feeling like I was being watched. It was a completely new feeling for me, and it sort of just built on itself, if that makes sense. Fear or any apprehension always seems to just make fear and apprehension worse, little by little. It didn't happen right away. The subdivision that my buddy's family lived in was the newest thing in that area. There weren't a lot of trees. There was a ton of open space and plenty of lighting, but immediately, after exiting the subdivision and getting to the road, all of that changed. There was much less light, more plants, and plenty of other things that obstruct your vision. I have since lived in some bigger metropolitan areas where I've been outside late at night and had other people walking around. This town was nothing like that, however, and was just the opposite. The very fact that I was a teenager and out that late at night would often have a cop stop me and ask me if anything was wrong. I doubt that they ever thought something really was wrong, but they were just bored and wanted something to do. But I'd never felt so uneasy before as I did this night, and I couldn't explain why at all. I started wondering if there was something out there that maybe my subconscious mind was picking up on that I wasn't otherwise aware of. And that made me a lot more nervous too. To get to my house, I could either go down the middle street in town, or I could go through the park. Although the town street would be less intimidating, I decided to go through the park. Yeah, it was a bravado thing completely. I told myself that it was a good idea to face my fears, blah blah blah. The park in town was actually rather huge. It was surrounded by an asphalt trail, much like you would see in a cemetery or such. There were trees lined up, all along the outside of the trail. There was a field for playing different sports as well, but late at night, none of the major lights for that were on. There were some lampposts in the park, but there were really not many of them. And then, on the really far end of the park, there was a playground for the children. It was eerie walking through there, and I immediately wished I had gone through town instead. But I decided to just try and get through it. I really wish I could explain it better than I have been doing. I just don't have the ability to really be that descriptive, but it was uncomfortable. As I walked down the path, I kept looking over at the playground. There was something there. It looked like something was moving. There were more lights over there than by me. I suppose that was a safety concern for children or something. But there was something moving a little. I kept trying to look at it as I moved along, but also walking up against the trees in order to not be seen. As I got closer, I finally was able to see what it was that was moving, and I was surprised to see that it was the merry-go-round. I kept watching, and it came into a bit more focus as I got closer and closer. There were apparently 2 people by the merry-go-round. It looked like one person was lying down on the merry-go-round. The other person was slowly spinning the go-round. Well, around, I guess. It was a weird thing to see at like 2 o'clock in the morning, but I didn't think too much about it. All I really figured is that a couple teenagers, older than me, probably boyfriend and girlfriend, being out late. I tried to keep quiet and not let them know I'd stumbled upon their activity. But to tell you the truth, with how nervous I'd been since leaving my friend's house, it made me feel a lot better to see some other people. It in fact washed away most of the apprehension that I was feeling, and I was able to make it the rest of the way home without worrying very much. It wasn't until the following afternoon that the fear came back to me. We lived in a really small town, and there was hardly any crime in that town, but my best friend had called me on the phone and asked me if I heard the news. What he said, well, it made me more scared than anything I had seen the previous night. A dead teenager was found in the park. She was found strangled to death by a few kids arriving to play on the merry-go-round upon which she was laying. I had to get in touch with the police and had an interview with them. Although no one could say for sure, the thought was that the person I watched spinning the merry-go-round had killed the teenager. I had to give a description as well as I could, which I did. It was a very scary thing, being the only witness of something like that, and it made my future walks at night all the more terrifying. Number 2. Snow Campus. I had a pretty difficult time when I first went to college. I didn't go to the same college as my friends, and I had 1 year of community college at first. Being a sophomore, I was able to have a room of my own if I wanted to, and I went for it. I guess that might have been a mistake, because it just further isolated me from people. But I really didn't know anyone at the school. I felt more comfortable that way. I didn't become that social either. I kept my dorm room closed most of the time. I was nervous about joining any clubs because I really didn't know where I would fit in. I felt like I was very out of place among the others there, and I did nothing to try and make that easier on myself. I liked sleeping in, so I took most of my classes in the afternoon or evening. One of my classes was once a week on Tuesday, and didn't end till about 10 p.m. It was on the far side of the campus from my dorm, so I was used to walking home late on Tuesdays across the campus. And this was never something that was scary or anything, because there were normally lots of other students around. This, however, happened on a very strange night. It was very, very cold outside, and although classes were not canceled, it seemed that the majority of students in the school had decided not to go to class. It started snowing during class too, and the class itself was 3 hours long. There were like 4 of us in the class, if I can remember that correctly. The professor had even asked us all if we wanted to stop class early since no one was there, and by that point it was snowing really hard outside, but all of us declined. We all enjoyed the class and enjoyed the teacher. By the time we were done, it was 10 p.m. The professor dismissed the class, and we all went our ways. I didn't have a real idea how hard the snow was falling, or just how cold it actually got, until I was out the door. The wind nearly blew the door closed on me. It was surprising. It was freezing, and the snow was blowing right into my eyes, but I needed to deal with it in order to get back to my dorm room. On the walk back, I tried to cut behind a couple of buildings that I sometimes walked behind. There were some trees, and it was generally a really quiet area that I liked walking through. I thought maybe it would allow me a little respite from the cutting wind. As I walked behind the building, though, I noticed a bit of a shape up ahead of me. There was someone else back there. I didn't give it a second thought, though, because I was on a campus with around 20,000 other students. However, what was weird was that whomever it was wasn't moving. They were just standing in place, so yeah, as I walked further and further up toward them, I did begin to get slightly freaked out. I felt like they were waiting for me or something. Still, as I got closer, the person did not move. And I was having a hard time seeing them very well because of the wind and the snow that was hitting my face. But the whole thing was feeling a little creepy by that point. While I walked to the side, I didn't want to come in contact with a person in any way. It wasn't someone I knew since I really didn't know anyone. As I was walking out of the way, though, something grabbed me by the left wrist. I nearly slipped and fell over, but managed to turn around. The figure had come over to me and grabbed my arm. It was then that I really only first got a good look at the person, and I really wish that I hadn't. He was a really disturbing-looking man who had to be too old to be a student. I wondered if he might be a homeless person on campus. I struggled to pull my wrist away, but he wouldn't let go. But I watched him move his other hand, and there was a knife in it. Panicking, I began kicking him in the knee. He at first lost balance, and then finally let go of me. And then he slipped too. I also slipped, but I was able to get some traction and I ran. I went to the door to the building that we were behind, and I got inside. I pulled the lock for the door, and I went to look for campus security. The campus police picked the guy up later on. Turns out that he had been waiting for somebody who was in the class that I had been in. That person skipped the class because of the storm. However, the figure assumed I was the student, and that's why he attacked me. The student later confided in me that the guy had been stalking him back since the beginning of the semester. He was worried that the guy had grown unstable and might have killed him if he got his hands on him. The only problem was, he only got his hands on me. Number 3. The basement. I used to work at a fast food restaurant in my early 20s. After a few years, I was promoted to a management position and moved to a smaller store in a town called Park City, Illinois. One really interesting thing was that there was a guy who would come into the store I previously worked in. He was a really large guy who kind of reminded me a bit of the lead singer of Blues Traveler. He dressed a little similarly too, and he always came into the store holding this cane that he didn't have to use for walking. The only thing I remember is that he always ordered a triple cheeseburger meal, large-sized. I was always friendly with the guy in the previous store, but that was as far as it went. I never talked to him very much, or any more than I normally would have from any other regular customer. However, when he began coming into the store in Park City, which was much smaller than the previous store, much less busy, the guy and I began to start talking more, and we actually began considering each other friends. His name was Paul, and he would come into the restaurant between 2 and 5 p.m., a couple times every week. We were normally very dead at that time period, so I could just talk to a customer for a while if I felt like it. He was unemployed, but had a computer programming job for like 17 years. Unfortunately, the company had laid off a lot of people. I think that his wife was a nurse or something. I know he watched a lot of movies. He would always show me his collected ticket stubs when he came in. He watched The Matrix a lot of times and kept telling me how good of a movie that it was, but at the time I had no interest in seeing it. I figured it was yet another virtual reality movie, and I hadn't seen any movies with that concept actually be good. There was one day that was a bit interesting to me. He'd come into the restaurant with a man he called Reverend Bob. They had a taped episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, another thing I didn't watch at the time, and we're talking about that and some other things. Paul introduced me to Bob as someone who had studied American Indian shamanism, and we all began talking about ghosts and things. Bob mentioned to me that although Paul never believed him, he had seen a ghost in Paul's house one time. I don't always or never believe someone when they talk about a ghost sighting. I take each explanation at face value on its own perceived merit, but I was mostly interested in this because it was a friend of mine and his buddy, and they both didn't agree on if there really was a ghost or not. Anyhow, at the time, Paul told me that he would take me over to his house in case sometime I wanted to see if there really was a ghost there, and I was pretty interested in that. At the time, I lived a bit away from the store. I had a place much closer to the one that I previously worked, and Paul lived pretty close to the one that I was a manager at. When I first got over to Paul's house, it was actually the perfect weather to be looking at a haunted house. If nothing else, it was a good atmosphere setter. Now at the time, I guess, I considered myself very spiritual and open-minded about that sort of thing. I had never seen a ghost or anything like that. I had done some things like involve myself in a spirit quest, and I had been to a sweat lodge once and had seen some things too, but I had never seen or really knew if I believed in ghosts or not. I didn't really disbelieve in them either. I only mentioned that because I had no idea what to expect if I actually would see a ghost. And when we went into Paul's house, I experienced something, a feeling, unlike any that I had ever experienced before. I am going to do my best to describe it, but I'm not sure how well I will be able to do this. It was like no matter where I stood, anywhere in the house, I felt like someone was peeking around the corner looking at me. Paul noticed immediately how distracted I got, and asked me if I felt something. I wasn't able to explain it to him as well as I explained it here, but it was the creepiest feeling that I had ever experienced in my entire life, and no matter what, I could not shake the feeling. Paul showed me throughout the house, and that feeling lingered the whole time. He showed me the bedrooms, the study, and then we went down into the basement. He had this game in the basement that he wanted to show me. He also had a huge collection of Pokemon cards, and he showed me those too. We played a couple games, and I had a fun time hanging out with him, despite the fact that I was not able to shake that odd feeling. But I was able to relax and pretty much have a good day. When we were going to go up to the main floor, wanting to get something to eat, I let him go up the stairs first. The stairs were just wooden boards, set off in a corner of the basement. As I was walking up the stairs, I was startled to see 2 green lights, as if they were eyes, appear in the darkness under the stairs. I jumped back, off the stair, and then saw something move in the dark. Paul noticed what happened. Before I could ask him anything, he asked me, "Did you see the green eyes under the stairs?" He then flipped on the light switch, which then showed me that there was absolutely nothing under those stairs, much less anything that could have made the lights. He explained to me that he never had seen the green eyes before, but the Reverend Bob, the guy he had mentioned earlier, had seen them once and told him about them. He hadn't mentioned it to me previously because, if I were to see them, he didn't want it to be because of the power of suggestion from him. But him telling me what I saw before I mentioned it to him definitely proved to me that I had seen something and that I have no explanation for it. Paul and I hung out occasionally for a while after that, but I never had an experience like that again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.